and beyond. Her research work on India's growth and development has been featured and frequently cited by leading global media outlets. Today, it is a privilege to have Professor Shamika Ravi hold this very first session at the Republic Dialogues, the Thought Leadership Series on Structural Reforms 2014 to 2022, What Lies Ahead. Professor Shamika Ravi, can we have you on stage? A huge round of applause.
Namaskar. Good morning, everyone. What a privilege. What a privilege. Thank you for this opportunity. Let me also say something which might be a bit controversial, but for a 47-year-old woman, it's very nice to be in a room where the median age looks like it's closer to 50, not 75. India is a young country. Of course, we're an old civilization, but we're a young country, and we are getting impatient. 47 is also almost 20 years more than the median age of the country. So the country is a lot younger than we are, and thinking in ways which are absolutely disruptive and innovative. Their ambition levels are very high. So some of the words are not mentioned: hope and optimism, ambition. This is a young country. This is a hungry country. This is a country looking for rapid growth. What I'm going to talk about today is the real economy, because we talk a great deal about the financial sector, which is what often when we think of the budget, we start looking at the Sensex, we start looking at some obvious indicators, but the real economy is so much more than just the financial sector. Let me start off by showing you the first slide, if this will work. Do you want me to point this somewhere? Yeah. So this is my first slide. I don't have any text. I'm just going to show you evidence. This is India's per capita income, GDP. And of course, we are quite familiar with this. The fact that we are the fastest growing major economy, the fact that this is the per capita, by the way. So it is not just the aggregate. Per capita is an ordinary Indian's income level. That's the way you should look at it. It's been rising very rapidly. But 47 years ago, an average Indian, an average Chinese, and an average South Korean were identical. Just 47 years ago. So around the time when I was born, we were similar, and just look at the difference today. So I want you to be sensitive to what is the growth potential and what is, oops. You can just take the top off. Okay, let's just go back to this. Growth is not an abstract concept. Growth is a lived reality. And all it took was a generation for a country like China, for a country like South Korea. One which is 10 times richer than us, and the other which is around 4.5 times richer than us. So economic growth, I want you to also, when you talk of ambition, yes, we have to be ambitious. We have a long way to go. Our growth potential, we are growing very fast, but our growth potential is enormous. Now, many people pick issues with economists that we are too obsessed with economic growth and GDP. This is the human development indicators. So it's not just that economically we are growing, and growing rather rapidly, but if you look at the human development indicator, which means it's a combination of outcomes for health, education, gender, etc., we are roughly 10 years behind China. So while economically we might be close to now 20 to 25 years behind China, developmentally we are a lot closer. And one of the reasons that you have to appreciate is that we are a democracy. And the media is a very large part of this. In a democracy, people demand services, demand development, and it gets done. It might be with a delay, it might not be even everywhere, but the fact that despite an economic growth which is behind China, a heavy blow, smaller economies are suffering also on account of the fact that they are too specialized. There are few sectors that determine their fate. So India is definitely one of the brighter sparks, even today, despite the pandemic. We are well on our way to achieving our developmental goals. You often hear, and I think media is a large part of the blame, India is getting intolerant and things are really falling off the cliff and so on. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the number of riots in India annually. Now, why do I pick something like riots to show to you? Because riot, definitionally, is a very precise thing. A riot involves, basically it is a violent episode which involves 5 people or more for a common purpose, and it is registered at the police station. What are you seeing? There is a structural breakdown. India used to be far more violent, if that's the word you want to use for riots, on the streets. Since 1990s, you're seeing a structural breakdown. There is a remarkable decline in the number of riots. So yes, today we are all on our telephones and our mobile phone, and every episode gets therefore magnified. But if you see the data objectively, we have far fewer conflicts in our streets today than we have had historically. Don't forget that. And I think it's important to keep an objective point of view. These are the number of rapes. Again, rape, why do I pick up some of these statistics? Because the definitions are precise. So you can do longitudinal or time-wise trends to see what is happening to India. So in crime against women, just these are our different states. The top one is India. What do you see? There is a structural breakdown. The number of episodes of rapes have begun to come down, and significantly so. In almost all the states, barring Jharkhand, Haryana, but everywhere else, there is a remarkable decline, and you must appreciate what this means on the ground. These are very, very big changes happening. This is infant mortality rate. Why do I map infant mortality rate? Well, it is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Children below the age of 1 that die per 1,000. And on the x-axis, you have growth, economic growth. So as the GDP per capita has been growing, look what is happening to infant mortality across all our states. Not just the southern states, also the most backward parts of the country, the biggest states, the poorest states. Infant mortality in India is crashing on account of significant economic growth. Because it's not just availability of healthcare. Yes, that's a very important factor. But when children get better water, cleaner, access to air, just cleaner food, more nutrition, they survive. So economic development, in real terms, are these things. What has been happening to food security? Just look at it. We are growing, that is around 112%. We are growing more than what we are consuming in our consumption basket as far as food is concerned. Our food imports are down to now less than 4%. So India is self-sufficient food-wise. It's an important thing to keep reiterating and educating people on, because we've lived through famines. A lot of our policies, and sometimes I think even people in policy-making positions, we still carry that shadow. We still carry the memory of those very difficult times. So our policy can also be sometimes lethargic. Right now, we have a problem of abundance, which means we need to work much more on distribution than more production. So distribution is an equally challenging and complex exercise, and that is where most of our effort has to go in. Of course, we have to diversify, but we are growing much more than we need, which is a great thing. Why is the current Russia-Ukraine crisis such a major factor, and why are we constantly talking about it? Because while food security is under our belt, in terms of defense, you are seeing India for the first time is actually exporting missiles, etc. Energy is an area where we continue to be extremely dependent on imports. Amongst the major economies, that's India, China, and the US, the percentage of our total energy consumed which is imported, ours is one of the highest, 34%. Now what you're seeing, the Americans have very systematically brought it down since 2005. They used to be very high too. They were close to 30%. You see what the Chinese, they're stabilizing around 15%. For us, it's still going up, which means, of course, we are a young, hungry country. We need to grow. For that, we need energy, and we are importing a lot of energy. But moving forward, this is basically to tell you why we need such a mass movement towards renewable. We need a green revolution equivalent in the energy space. Remember when green revolution happened and the farmers adopted high-yield variety and how production rose within 2 decades, almost everywhere in the country. We are standing at that cusp of energy revolution. So renewable for us is strategically of a long-term interest, and we have to do it. I want to talk a little bit about labor market, because we are a young country and you keep hearing about demographic dividends, which could turn into a disaster, is something we are constantly warned. But I want to sensitize you to certain peculiarities, which is basically, these are idiosyncratic to India. It's not very common globally. But first, we have to distinguish between something called labor force youth globally. The youth today are far more inactive, meaning economically they're not working, than historically ever. And that is true for India as well. What you see here is the unemployment rate of people above the age of 30, those are the gray bars, and look at the unemployment rate of people below the age of 30, 18 to 30. There's a huge difference. There's a 6-fold difference. But now here is a peculiarity where we are not like the rest of the world. We have something called graduate unemployment. So we are a little bit similar to the Chinese like that. These are only youth, so we're not talking about older people. Look at the unemployment rate of people who have graduate degree and above amongst the youth. So these are all 18 to 30-year-olds who all have at least a graduate degree. These are the red bars. Look at their unemployment. Compare that to the unemployment of the youth who are almost uneducated, primary and below. They are working. The unemployment rate for the uneducated youth is very low, while the unemployment rate for the highly educated in the country is almost 6 times as much. That is a bizarre situation, right? Historically, we were taught that you study hard, and the more you study, you're likely to get better jobs. But that is not true anymore. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to sit at home today. And that is a problem. What we have to get the youth to also do is take up risks. Now you appreciate why Startup India and the whole atmosphere and the climate around startups is so important. The mindset has already changed, but we need to change it beyond, amongst the older lot as well. You know, the cool kids, when we were in college, cool kids carried a guitar. Today, cool kids in a college have a startup. So the nature of aspirations and the kind of ambition the youth are holding are different. They're no longer looking for that safe, secure, salaried employment, which perhaps even our generation sought, right? And this is a reflection of. So managing expectations is a very important part of this decision. The second is, of course, there is a growing divide between an educational degree and actual skill in the market. Because while we are seeing that our educated youth are more likely to sit at home, the industry is also repeatedly telling us our biggest constraint is skilled manpower. It's not finance anymore. We can raise the finance. Skilled manpower is our biggest constraint to growth. How can the two coexist? The two coexist because degrees and skills that the market values and is willing to pay for, there is a growing divide, which is why you must appreciate Skill India. Skill India is an effort to bridge the gap, to get industry into the classroom and to get the classroom out into the workspace. That is the big divide. Now I want to talk a little bit about agriculture. Right? These are all snippets of lots of research, but it's important because these are structural aspects of the economy. The whole brouhaha we had around the farm laws. For last 40 years, economists on the left, right, center, whatever your political orientation, everybody agreed that we need farm reforms. We needed those farm laws, but we couldn't prevail, right? And I want to showcase to you why Punjab, it is a case study today. Punjab is that black line. Punjab used to be the richest state of the Union until 18 years back, not very long. 18 years is all it took. The richest state of India, when an average Haryanvi was poorer, average Himachali, all these states were poorer than Punjab. Today, an average Haryanvi is 1.5 times richer than an average Punjabi. Himachal Pradesh has taken off. You see what has happened, and this is why the debate on freebies, and you've heard the Prime Minister talk about it. This is the public debate we will have to have. And Punjab remains a case study of why we cannot continue with these kind of policies. Punjab, the richest state, is an agricultural state. It continued to cross-subsidize agriculture by almost penalizing industry. So industry has to pay a lot more for energy just to sustain the high subsidies to agriculture. Now, when that happens, and couple that with poor labor laws, etc., and regulatory burden, what happens to industry in today's day and age? They are not stuck to a state anymore. They will move. So what happened to most of the industries in Punjab? They moved. Where did they go to? Some actually went beyond to Vietnam, China, etc., but almost the whole bulk moved to Himachal, Haryana, Manesar, Rajasthan, that whole belt. So in a competitive federal structure, which India is today, and every state is hungry to get more investment, no state can continue with such regressive policies. Of course, when you make electricity or power very, very cheap for any group of producers, in this case farmers, Punjab is growing rice. They don't have rainfall, but they are growing rice. You can imagine what that does to the ecology. So it has one of the fastest decline in water table. When we were in college, almost our schools, our sports equipments came from Punjab. A lot of textiles, woolens, everything came from Punjab. Punjab today has seen such rapid deindustrialization. Industries have moved out. And deindustrialization in today's day and age, you can imagine what that means for jobs. It's a border state, so there are all kinds of other repercussions. So this becomes a case study on why distortionary policies of this nature not sustainable. We have to have a serious debate. Occasionally you've heard politicians say, if you have the budget, you can spend it. However, regressive the policy. But that's not actually true. It's not about budget. Punjab had the budget. It was true that they were taking from one side and giving to the other. They had the budget at that point. But in economics, we often talk about incentives. What will this do to your budget in 20 years? There is no more budget. Industry has moved. So incentive, you have to understand. Over time, bad policies become very, very difficult to reverse. Now, this is something, these are the last couple of slides. I've started to talk a great deal because I think people aren't quite aware of the micro-revolution that this country is witnessing. Just the kind of serious outreach and growth in terms of access to amenities that we are seeing across the country, it is unprecedented. It is unprecedented anywhere. I'm showing you here the bottom 20%, meaning the poorest people in each state, what has happened to the access to electricity. In 2014-15, access to electricity for the poorest in any state was around 53%. Today, it is around 86%. We have 19 states and union territories where the poorest in the state has more than 95% access to electricity. Can you comprehend what is the nature of this transformation that is happening in the real economy? What does access to electricity do? Children study more, businesses can run longer, you can work longer, many things, entertainment, media. Access to electricity is like a foundational rock on which economies get built, right? Now, here is an answer to the question of, yes, but the rhetoric that you hear in the media all the time, that only some segments are receiving it and not everyone. Well, that same electricity for the poorest, I break it down across Hindu, Muslim, general, OBC, SC, ST. Just look at the result. In 2014-15, 50% of poorest Muslim households had electricity. Today, that number is 86%. In 2014-15, 52% Hindus had it, the poorest. Today, it is 85%. So the economic growth in terms of development and access to amenities is truly inclusive in this country. And you're seeing what is happening with other social categories. You're seeing a resurgence, a huge improvement in access. Now, an important thing to bear in mind is this going to show up in the GDP overnight or the inequality metrics? No. It doesn't show up overnight. Because accessing electricity, what you do with that additional time and access, it comes with time. It takes a couple of years. We have seen this historically in every country, including the US, Europe, etc., where it is very well documented that when electricity comes or roads come, productivity, labor productivity rises, and within 10 years you see a remarkable gap in the real economy. So these are the foundational stone, these are the foundational work of the real economy which is being set in motion. I want to end with this slide, simply as a word of caution, because we are sitting, we are talking in a media house event. I want to talk to you a little bit about an area in economics called narrative economics. You know, earlier in corporate finance, we would often study this, and it's very well documented, that companies float stories about themselves. And you do it strategically so that it impacts the share price. It is no longer a phenomenon that we only see in corporate finance. It is very much becoming a phenomenon for real global economy. Okay? This is a graph that looks at tone of media. And this data includes hundreds of millions of data points from Google. So all media, more than 100 languages, global media, more than 100 languages, they are in this data. Using natural language processes, because data is very powerful, we can do a lot of things with data. Natural language processing, we can actually put a tone to the coverage of the particular episode. Is it a good coverage, positive, is it negative? And you can assign a value on how good and how bad, okay? This is so the universe of this study, when I started looking at it, it starts at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, look at the global media coverage for all major economies, China, Sweden, India, US, Germany. Everyone's getting negative coverage because that is the role of the media. The media's job is to highlight problems. So everything looked fine. What happened within 6 months of the pandemic? While the democracies of the world, and that is why I have picked these countries, Sweden and Germany are relatively smaller democracies and more homogeneous, large federal country like US and India, all of them are getting negative coverage. In fact, that big blip you see is Donald Trump. That is the election in the US. Media's coverage of these countries has remained negative. What has happened of China, however, what do you see? The global media coverage of China has not only over time completely decoupled, they're getting positive coverage globally now. This is called media management. This is called narrative economics. This is not a random fact. This is something which is created. So this, in some sense, is a measure I have given you of how narratives are created. Now this goes back to the oldest saying that the universe is not made of atoms. The universe is made of stories. And who controls the stories is eventually trying to control the universe. So don't believe everything that you read. Don't believe everything that you hear. That's the power of research and data, that you have to go back and verify some of these things. So this is the reality of the world we live in. This is all media. It's global. It's not Indian media. It's not US media. Global media. And over time, we have begun to hear news of how Bolivian media house got bought by China. Argentinian media house got bought. So you know what is the kind of change that the global economy, from a media perspective, media is what tells us about the situation in the world. It is not what you hear or see. It goes much deeper than that. So I will end with that. I'm very happy to take questions and chat more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ravi, for that very engaging and enlightening presentation on what India must prepare itself for. It was a pleasure to hear your presentation. But shortly from now, I'm going to request you to come back on stage. Because also, like Arnab mentioned, today amongst us is someone you all know, from Pune especially, very, very well, Mr. Rajan Navani, as a digital futurist entrepreneur, like you've known him. Many of you also know him as the chairman and MD of the Indian arm of Jetline Group and Jet Synthesis. You may also know him as the technologist who is an ex-NASA engineer with prominent investments in the metaverse, machine learning and tech space. But what many of you don't know is that Mr. Rajan Navani is part of the founding team of Republic. Of course, Arnav did share that with us. In fact, his co-working space, Garage, is where Republic first took roots. So to him, we owe our origin and location. As the founder and CEO of Jet Synthesis, he has a vision to digitally transform India. With Jet Synthesis, he has ensured that world-class digital products and platforms that are built in India and have a deep impact in the nation and across the world. It gives me immense pleasure to invite him on stage for an invigorating conversation with Professor Shamika Ravi once again. Thank you. And would invite both of you once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Republic TV. Thank you, Arnab, for those kind words. And thank you for being and doing this here in Pune, as we had discussed last time. I think it's always a pleasure to have a conversation around India, have a conversation around the future of India and our role in the world. And I think what better platform than to do it here at Republic with you. So again, thank you. And Shamika, thank you. I think you laid out a phenomenal presentation. Really, which took us through the journey of India relative to so many other countries on so many different factors. And, I think the one thing that stood out from your, presentation and the way I look at this conversation, since, she mentioned we got to make it invigorating, is the fact that the future of India is really in the hands of our youth. And I don't think it's only the future of India, it's the future of the world. Because 1 in 10 people in the world today is an Indian under the age of 25. Now, if we have that kind of a demography and that kind of a demographic power, there is no way, as Arnab, you rightly mentioned, that hockey stick moment, of the next 25 years, as we look and envision what India will be in 2047, is not created on the back of this demographic dividend that we have, the ability for us, like you rightly said, to skill them, to build capacity in them so that they can not only create a difference in terms of what they can produce for the world, but also will eventually become the highest consumers in the world, and actually take that across the Gen Zs around the world, which is also going to be the largest population which is going to be employable over the future. So I think the moment is very, very right, and I don't think many a times you get a moment in the history of a country when a developing country of 1.4 billion people with such a large youth demographic advantage can actually transform itself from a developing country to a developed country over the next 25 years. I don't think in the history of mankind it has happened. And I say a democratic country that's doing that. And I think that's the beauty of our India, where we are today, and the future. And I think what you rightly said, is what has brought us here definitely won't take us there. And I think this dialogue is here today to see how can we turbocharge, how can we accelerate, how can we create an order of magnitude change which is disproportionate to what would happen if we were just to incrementally do more of the same, and really see how we can make that India come alive, as a part of this discussion and as a part of these dialogues that will only strengthen the base and the foundation on which we will build that. And I think, Shamika, you and I were talking earlier that this conversation needs to run across multiple stakeholders. It's got to have government, it's got to have corporate, it's got to have civil society to really have these conversations in a positive, meaningful manner, because it's only when we understand each other that we will be able to bring about, significant change that is well-founded on principles that, we all talk about all the time. So again, I think with that little context, I think we'll just take this conversation further. I truly believe that the future of India would come about more, and you mentioned very, very well, about well-structured reforms, policies that actually have the ability, to be able to strengthen over a long-term period. How do we build capacity? How do we really look at, building India in multiple aspects from a GDP growth rate. So if we really come to our economy and we say that if India were to become a $26 trillion economy by 2047, or even a $40 trillion as some, we need to be able to ensure we have anywhere between 6 to 8, actually 10% kind of a growth rate, for a country like India. How do we really make that happen? What, according to you, from all the statistics and figures that you shared, what would be those 2 or 3 drivers, that will enable us to really, get onto that path? And really, how can the budget this year, help us address that?
Thank you for that extremely comprehensive question. Oh, Rajan, we have to either keep the next 100 years in mind, or we can get lost in the budget. And I think I like the fact that Arnab, look, this year it's the final budget of, a final budget of the government before they go into elections. If you read the leaves, the tea leaves, in fact, we have done a paper and I recommend you read it. We do natural language processing to study the budget speeches of the last 50 years of India's independence. So you read the finance minister's budget speeches and you see exactly what we focus on. Some things have been taboo for a very long period of time, such as privatization. And there is, of course, now an effort to reverse it. It's not an easy task, and I think we all appreciate that. But I think budget is really, we make a bigger deal of it. I think a lot of the action is beyond the budget. And with this government, if you see the big reforms that have happened, in fact, pandemic time is when a lot of our reforms actually did happen. But we had a conversation with the Prime Minister last week. He had called a group of economists. And there is a distinction in the way some of us see this from the way typically macroeconomists view the economy. Macroeconomists look at economy more from an accounting perspective. No, private investment ghat raha hai, isko badhana hai. Exports badhana hai. So these are like, income is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. But the real economy is much more than that. How do you reverse private investment? How do you instill greater faith in the business community the way you have, right? Well, how do you get a commitment like that over the next few generations? One thing, we have to continue to become more business friendly. And it is, again, not the job of the federal government alone, but you saw the unemployment numbers. The states have a great role to play. And some states have played that role. In fact, this cooperative and sometimes competitive federal structure works in our favor right now, because we are not losing businesses to outside world. States are losing to one another, so in net, that is still fine for us. But the others are catching up. That's a great thing. That's the beauty of competition in many ways. But human capital, Rajan, is at the end of the day, you build a nation, people build nations, and you build a nation on the back of skilled, educated manpower, and healthy population. Strategically, if you see, the OECD countries, which are the richest, most affluent countries, they are aging. And they're aging quite rapidly. No country in the world has managed to reduce healthcare expenditure on account of this. Every country is right now battling healthcare expenditure. Therein lies our opportunity. In fact, even China, the biggest fear that China has structurally, because of some of their faulty policies in the past, but we are where we are, they have a real fear that they are going to become old before they actually become rich. China is a middle-income country today, and not even a high middle-income country. It's a mid-middle-income country. We are a low middle-income country. But the demographics are still in our favor. So if we know that there is a global demand for healthcare, and by healthcare I mean there is human resource in healthcare, so you need more doctors, nurses, etc., paramedics and so on. You also need specialized health IT. In fact, a lot of the AI solutions which are emerging, which are getting deployed in the market, are in healthcare, because such is the desperation of healthcare costs. You have to reduce it. Then, of course, I mean, we have fancied ourselves, and rightfully so, being pharmacy to the world, but we have to continue to build on that. We have to manufacture and design and do the required R&D. So healthcare now has to be viewed as an engine of growth, not as a social sector. And I think that is a sort of a change we need to bring about in policymakers, and I think in the market at large. Right?
Yeah, I think in health, particularly when we look at, again, the young demography, wellness has become a key driver of that. And if you're looking at, countries around the world, I was in Singapore on a thing, and I think they're all looking at how the state expenditure will happen towards keeping people healthy rather than addressing, the state subsidies. So I think all of these subjects will become mainstream. And I think India has an opportunity to kind of, take that forward. You talked of China, right? At a time when the world is talking today in, moving, tracks to a supply chain of China plus one, I think 2047 from, everyone should be talking an India plus one strategy, right? And if we have to bring that shift, right? Not only that, it will be China plus India, which is what everybody's talking today, but if the conversation has to be, we have to have an India plus one strategy. Again, this next 25 years, what are those few things that you feel need to be addressed on priority? Because you've been closely watching, the developments, and what do you think needs to get done?
I think earlier the complaint used to be the infrastructure sucks, that it takes forever to move things and so on. I think on the infrastructure front, Rajan, we have come a long way. And I showed you data only for electricity and that too for the poorest. But if you just look at the connectivity in this country, the road network, electricity, there is a networked economy which is getting created from state to state, which is great. Today, I think our biggest constraint remains skill. And I think in terms of adoption of technology, we need for businesses to also adopt. And I think that is where the competition that our businesses are facing today are not as much from the external global players right now, but more from, across each other. I think striking and imbibing a greater sense of competition, which perhaps will lead, or the market forces you to adapt technology. We need those kind of ease of doing businesses, and we need the kind of competition policies. So on the policy front, tons of work beyond finance. I think we somehow limit our conversations on economy to access to finance. So the finance ministry is expected to put this much into that sector and so much. I think the conversation has to go much, much beyond finance, because industry after industry, almost all surveys that we do, including the annual survey of industries, the markets, the businesses are telling you it's not capital. Capital we will figure out. It's more the real skills. It is the regulatory burden which we still have. In fact, the Prime Minister's call now is to decriminalize, there is a bill being prepared, to decriminalize a lot of economic business activities, right? The Factories Act, etc., which are archaic. So you don't want this kind of a Damocles sword to be hung on a business's back all the time when you're thinking of starting something or innovating. And I think that requires, one, from the policy perspective, but when I spoke about expectation management, I think as a community, as people, I think even religious leaders and so on, as a community, we need to become more risk-taking, and we need to allow the youth to take on risk, meaning it's okay to fail. This is a different generation. I think they understand it, but the elders don't. The elders are still looking for the safe livelihood. And that mindset requires a community-wise change in expectations.
Yeah, no, I think technology and what you rightly mentioned, startups and entrepreneurship, is going to be the driver of economic strength and can create, massive change fairly quickly. The other segment of society, and I think our Prime Minister also alluded, Yuva Shakti and Nari Shakti, and you mentioned in your presentation, you'll talk a little bit about that, right? There's so many educated women who are not part of the employable workforce today. How do we change that narrative? How do we really get that other power to get unlocked if we truly want to realize our aspirations for India at 100?
That is a deeply personal question. That is also, as an economist, I must tell you, it is not an easy question. And let me try and explain why. In India, a working age group woman, meaning a woman from the age of 18 to 60, on an average spends 7 hours per day taking care of either children or the elderly. 7 hours per day is spent on what we call care economy. This is average. What about women who are working? Women who are working in that age group are also spending on an average 4 hours a day. Can you imagine the amount of value that is getting created in the household? But it's not a part of our GDP. Why? Because it is not a marketable transaction. In the OECD countries, and mostly of the West, this is a marketable activity, meaning it's a transaction. You get someone, you pay a nanny, you pay a daycare you pay for someone to come and take care. So it's a marketable transaction, so it shows up in the GDP. Here, it is done in the household, so it is discounted. We are not measuring it. But as a statistician, that's an easy fix. I can impute a value. By the way, we do that in agriculture. When we decide on MSP, we actually calculate own production, own family, how much labor time is spent, and we decide on an MSP based on that. So statistically it can be done, but the problem is not merely statistical. The pandemic has shown us, and this is a deeply, I think, for Indians, it's something personal to all of us. You know, historically we are seeing the largest number of elderly without kin, meaning without family. There is a breakdown of the family structure. So we have to now think and ask ourselves that women entering labor force in marketable activities, it's a very precarious path, but we have to tread it. How much of these can be outside of the household? Meaning, is it a marketable activity? Because making care marketable activity, while it's leading to longer lives, it is also leading to, in many measures, miserable life, the life of loneliness. So we saw that during the pandemic, so many old age homes, because again comorbidities, etc. were involved, lots of elderly died alone. So the breakdown of the family structure is also closely linked with women working outside. As a working mother, you can understand why we feel so closely about it. But the statistical fix is an easy one. The real policy fix and the society fix is what will take time. We have to get the men to pitch in. 7 hours per day is being spent on care. It is unsustainable, which is why Japanese women not having children. Increasingly, Chinese women, despite change in policy, don't want to have children. Scandinavians don't want to have children. So these kind of reversal that you see, it is not an outcome of policy of a government. Sometimes it is just the way the community responds. We have to get our men to pitch into maintenance and sustenance of family. Rearing and bearing children cannot be disproportionately. Cost should not be borne only by the women, not sustainable. Not sustainable.
So a structural generational shift in the way society operates, I think, is required on multiple angles, right? I think, when you see Japan talking of a society 5.0, which is built on technology as a, base around which everything in society will function, since you raised Japan, and the family structures of India, I think a lot, will change and get disrupted. I think we anyways live in a very uncertain world. But, coming back more again to the economy, and if we were to look, for the next 2 years and 3 years, to be able to realize and unlock what we are talking of, putting India back. I mean, we are still already on one of the fastest growing countries, but on the higher growth track from where we are. What could be, as I said, I'm pushing you again on one or two of those key drivers, that we should see, or what should we address today, collectively, right? What you rightly said, if government raises something, how does industry respond? Is it increasing, like we've talked of the manufacturing power of India, we talk of the services power, we talk of the innovation power, right? How do we really, grow that? So where do you see, 2 or 3 of the priorities, which are immediate and now, and then we'll open it up to some questions from the audience.
I think we need to continue working on building confidence within the business community, Rajan. Our private investments have to rise. We cannot have long-term sustainable exponential growth on the back of government spending. Our private investments have been falling for the last 10 years, and that has to be reversed. That will not get reversed by simply asking for it. That will require, that will not even just get done by changing rules. And here I'm saying the state, which is not merely the government, our laws also, right? If you remember the coal allocation and the annulment, after 18 years of allocation, our judiciary also has to be sensitized to the fact that you need an economic training in understanding that 18 years is a generation. In 18 years, an entire economy emerged out of the coal allocation. So when we said this is wrong and we annul it, it tells us that we are not looking at the economy and livelihood and what does it do to the future of our children and grandchildren. We are looking at judgments as right and wrong, not as an intelligent judgment, that what is required for well-being of the community and the nation as a whole. So I think that's why I say it has to go beyond government. The government is a very large part of it. When we say reduce regulatory burden, that is the rules, and the rules are changing. Mark my words, there is tremendous pressure on Delhi and within, to the administration to decriminalize things, continue to make things smoother from the regulatory perspective. But the confidence building that is required will require this continued work from the judiciary, from the government, and for the businesses to continue to work closely with.
Yeah, I think the key word here is trust, right? How do we build trust between government, industry, civil society? And I think that's a virtuous cycle. Because once the trust comes, I think, and the alignment that comes, we can, continue to grow ahead. I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions, if from the audience someone would like to ask.
All right, hi, this is Abhishek. Professor Ravi, you gave that presentation on structural reforms with all those graphs and numbers. What I think everyone here would want to understand is what has changed, which has brought in this scale in all these statistics, electricity, reach, for example, or the one that you gave.
What has changed?
What has changed that has led to that scale of achievement in those structural reforms? Because structural reforms have been going on since early 90s.
Always,
but
yes.
I think what has changed recently is perhaps the scale.
Right. I think it's a priority that, that Prime Minister Modi's government, and I think it is also driven right from the top. In fact, it might sound to you as a rhetoric, and for academics like us who look at numbers and read, it took a considerable amount of research and reading and comprehension to realize that we have to acknowledge there is something called political entrepreneurship. If you continue to look at the past data and predict what we should be doing, you will always discount disruptors like Prime Minister Modi at the center, but also leaders who bring about change. Narasimha Rao did it at one point. You discount it at state level. Chandrababu Naidu did it, right? Again, Modi in Gujarat did it. You have to understand political entrepreneurs are people who will disrupt, who do give an agenda, and they drive it right from the top. In fact, there is an excellent Lancet study which looks at Swachh Bharat. That why is it that the toilets, it's not like we didn't have the means. How did India build over 100 million toilets within a few years? And toilets, right? It took a mission right from the top, and it took a prime minister for him to walk the streets with a broom and make it a priority. So I think, in organizational behavior literature, you have to understand the governance and how governments will react. A lot of it is driven on how clear the mission is and what is the level of monitoring and auditing that happens on a regular basis. So Swachh Bharat is an excellent example of how it got done. By extension, I think electricity, and this is the power of democracy as well. We have to understand that people, and particularly I think women voters in India, we call it a silent revolution, no longer silent, but last 15, 20 years, women coming out and voting in large numbers has changed the nature of Indian democracy. Women are not voting for abstract concepts. They are voting for water, electricity, safety. This is very well established in the literature. And I think the truly statesmen and the politicians with ears on the ground are responding in kind. You are seeing this state after state, election after election. Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. I am a teenager right now, and I am no economics major, and I'm still a student. So I wanted to ask a question. So I'm obviously thinking about the next 25 years of my life. So due to the automation which is happening right now, due to machines taking place instead of humans, and of course, like the way you talked about the production, like we are not financially productive right now. So after 2 or 3 years, there will be a surge in the skilled labor because like everyone will graduate, like you said, that right now they might be just giving exams, etc. So when they actually graduate and enter the working class, the employment which should actually rise might just generate more unemployment, because like right now, like 2 or 3 days before, India hit the first place in population. So what do you propose is an effective way to deal with this? Because I, as an Indian citizen, how can I be secure in my employment opportunities when there is a lot of automation and unemployment taking place? Thank you so much.
Great question, Rajan.
Yeah, you want to take it first, then I'll add to that. Yeah.
So, excellent question, young lady, and a very valid one. But remember that don't think of yourself as a passive job seeker. You're also likely to become a job giver. A lot of entrepreneurship is about innovation, new ideas, and every time a business gets established, they also employ a few. So that is number one. The fear on automation, I think it's a genuine fear. But the more we read and understand the latent changes that are happening on account of automation, I think the nature of jobs that humans will do will change. Meaning we are going to use machines for simpler tasks, right? But creativity, right? Arts, music, empathy. In fact, that is why I continue to talk about the care economy so much. At the end of the day, people will need people to hold their hands when they fall sick. There are going to be many, many jobs for humans. I think the job for humans is also likely to change, but it is no longer going to be what we thought 25 years back. That if we learn coding, and I did engineering, I'm fine. Nobody's fine anymore. So you need to continue being creative.
We talked about like what has brought us here won't take us there, right? Your question really fits right there, right? Today, learning is not a one-time thing. You have to be a lifelong learner, right? It's not about, one job for a lifetime, but it's, a lifetime of careers, which is achieved in one lifetime. I think there are many, many aspects to the way the young generation will look at livelihoods and livelihood enhancement, the livelihood mobility, and therefore I think the capacity to be able to adapt and learn and do that, relatively quickly as a nation is probably going to drive us. But a big advantage, at least for India, is that there is aging population around the world, and I think Indians are driving a large part of the global workforce and will continue to do that in many ways. But one thing that you see historically, when there were carriages and when cars came in, people thought it's the end of the world, and there are going to be no jobs for people to do. So every revolution that has happened has actually created more jobs than there were ever existed. And I think that's the beauty of this generation. Of course, with machines, we got to address the ethics of AI. We got to address how tomorrow, if a machine is giving direction to man, how does that work? And I think that's where governments, I think multilaterally, need to come together to define some frameworks and standards within which the world will move. And I think that's the excitement, but also the challenge for all of our generation.
I think it's a huge challenge, Rajan. I think on the AI and the ethics, and also remember that there is a reason that certain, and COVID might have been an outcome of that. We're not entertaining conspiracy theory here, but there are certain kinds of research which I think countries like India will resist, which China did not, right? Certain kinds of, because there are ethical concerns, and I think there are many more filters. Democracies lend themselves to, I think, a lot more noise, of course, in the short run. But in the long run, there are more course correction mechanisms in-house. And because of that, in AI, we might feel occasionally frustrated that we aren't. After all, we have so much data. And AI is all about how much and what is the variation that you have in the data. Because more diverse the data, the richer the data, the more precise or better the AI solutions likely to be. So other than China and India, no other country has this bandwidth to do it in the future. Sometimes we get frustrated that we were leaders in IT. 15 years back, the Chinese would come here and study Bangalore model, and now look where they are. But I think sometimes, that's the reason I showed you a lot of these graphs, that you need to step back and not get lost in the noise of it, and see that the general direction is in the right direction.
Yeah, and what you say, but if you really see the few trillion-dollar companies that have got created in the world, most of them being technology companies in the US, and all of them have a lot of Indian talent that has gone to shape that. As a matter of fact, Indian leadership there that is shaping that. And you raise a great question, because I think it's a perfect way to end. that the future of the world is going to be driven by multiple technologies. You know, a chip in the brain is going to enhance your capacity like you cannot even imagine, right? What happens, because we operate at 7% of our capacity of the brain, if everybody's human brain is expanded by a few percentage points just by putting a chip? I mean, you look at drone technology, what it's doing to mobility. You take blockchain and the way it has democratized the world, you know, forget the cryptocurrency and all of that, but the power of blockchain to be able to transform every single industry, enterprise-wise, around the future, are all exciting changes that are happening at the same time when there are wars taking place, when there is, you know, so much of conflict in the world, so many challenges, but so much, you know, opportunity. And that's the uncertain world that, you know, India has got an opportunity to navigate both geopolitically, economically, and strengthen our position, you know, to becoming a global leader by 2047. So again, thank you, Shamika. I think it's been a, you know, great conversation around where India can go, and let's see how we can all play our little role to make it happen. Thank you.
If I may, I want to give a real-world example of what is happening in healthcare. You know, in Uttar Pradesh, we don't have very good primary health centers are not that great run. Human resource is the biggest constraint. So you know what? Now one of the solutions, and Rajan, it struck me only when you were talking, that many of the primary health centers, when patients go, there is a nurse and a paramedic who's writing down, but the computer is linked to a doctor in Telangana. And so the Telangana doctor is basically looking and seeing patients, only because telemedicine is possible today. But of course, the ethical concerns remain, right? Like today when we say a phone, is a phone a part of me? Should someone just have access to it? After all, it is like my brain. It's an extension of my brain. So it's not going to be so easy. We will have a lot more ethical and legal things to think through, but the opportunities are infinite. And we all end on this hugely optimistic note. Yeah. That this is where the action is.
And you'll be probably one of those job creators, right? As an entrepreneur, so not a job seeker. So don't worry about the jobs that will come the way of others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ravi and Mr. Navani, for such an interesting and captivating conversation. The insights from this conversation that have given all of us a lot to think about. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our next segment. India is the third largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. The world is bullish on the country's growth. India is being called an independent powerhouse. And India may become the third largest economy by 2030. Overtaking Japan and Germany. But what is needed to materialize these projections is the question. How can the India growth story be catalyzed by Budget 2023? And what will top economists be looking out for in Budget 2023? Our esteemed guests, expert economists, read the tea leaves on the Indian economy. This next discussion is on India's economic present and future. Before that, let's play out this AV.
India's economy has emerged as an outlier amid global gloom. There is global confidence in India's markets. Highest annual FDI inflow of $83.57 billion last year. India's equities are hitting an all-time high. India's 5G market is expected to expand by 70%. India is gearing up to carve a position in the top 3 economies. But how do we catalyze this growth curve? Now we decode the prospects for the future. Republic Media Network presents India's Economic Present and Future, a SWOT analysis.
And I'd now like to invite the panel, Ms. Kavita Chako, who is the Chief Economist at Nuvama Wealth Research. Her work is focused on macroeconomic research covering the Indian and global economy. With almost 2 decades of experience in diverse organizations, Ms. Chako has keen insights on economic research, credit rating, and market research. She's previously worked with CARE Ratings. As a senior economist, she's also worked at Angel Broking and the National Commodity and Derivatives Exchange, that is NCDEX, as an economist. Let's have a huge round of applause for her. Also next we have with us Professor R.K. Patnaik. He is a professor at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. He holds a PhD from IIT Mumbai in applied economics. He has taught at various top universities and was working with the RBI in the past. As part of the RBI, Dr. Patnaik was involved in IMF Article